Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network. It's all things NASCAR all the time around these parts, with one final regular season race to go before we'll know the field of 16 that'll go into the 10-race sprint to crown a NASCAR Series champion. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor and my co-host on this very fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, lo and behold, buddy, we don't bet the super speedway, and it's Harrison Burton coming home at price tags of 1,000 to 1. That could have atoned for a lot of our gambling trials and tribulations had we had the foresight to see that coming.
I think anyone that did see that coming certainly had a great weekend.
Do we think the Burton family saw that coming? Do we think?
Based on the reactions,
bet his mom or his fiance. Do you think any of them, if they were allowed to bet, would have decided, you know what? Let's walk to the window down at the old Hard Rock somewhere in the Florida Panhandle and see if we can get down about 10 to 15 bucks on our Sunday morning to try and get to victory lane.
Can't imagine. But yeah, congratulations to Harrison Burton. What a hell of a final race this would have made for before the playoffs. You know, I love Darlington. I love the weekend, the Labor Day weekend, Southern 500. But man, something about just punching a ticket in that manner, I thought was great to wrap up the regular season. I did not have Austin Dillon and these guys that are winning races. It's incredible. Austin Dillon out of nowhere. And then I guess I could see Harrison Burton. You couldn't see. Look, when we went through a list of drivers you thought could win the race, there was no chance that the guy sitting dead last in the point standing. Oh yeah, I could see it. No, that never came out of your mouth. There's no revisionist history around here. Yeah, but if you were to say that Austin Dillon wins a race, well, let's just say that caution hadn't come out. Austin Dillon wins the race with the best car, or at a non-plate track, or Harrison Burton wins a plate track. I could see Harrison Burton winning a plate track a hell of a lot more easily than I could see Austin Dillon winning at Richmond. But certainly sets, we're not going to take a lot away from this race. We're not going to, use any of the information that we gleaned from that race and apply it this week at Darlington. But it certainly does paint a playoff picture that I think will have implication when it comes to, betting this week's race at Darlington.
Well, we'll get to the playoff picture in stage 3. It won't be an elongated segment by any stretch of the imagination, but I think going forward, when we get to hit the reset on the drivers that are on the cut line, looking to try and advance through various stages, it'll give us the perfect vehicle to try and be able to do so. We talk about Harrison Burton, but I do think doesn't happen often these days that we give drivers credit for being gracious in defeat. But Kyle Busch, knowing everything that was at stake, had a chance, no doubt about it, to race like the aforementioned Austin Dillon, clear Harrison Burton out. That would have prompted the caution and punched his ticket to the postseason. He draws a lot of heat, and rightfully so, for some of his surly interviews he does with NASCAR media. But that reminded us why Kyle Busch has won as many times as he could. And that should be, what NASCAR uses as the gold standard for how drivers are expected to behave when they're racing for a victory in the final laps, regardless of track type.
Yeah, Kyle is racing for the same thing Harrison Burton is, and I would imagine even more. He's still at RCR, you would consider a top-tier team, and he's won, every season. So there was a lot on the line, and I thought Kyle was going to pull it off, but man, the momentum there that Harrison Burton got down the backstretch, and then in 3 and 4 was unmatched, and then he did a great job of blocking. So hats off to him, and I applaud Kyle Busch for not. He certainly had a chance to make a move there. Wouldn't have guaranteed his win, but it certainly would have guaranteed that Harrison Burton didn't get in. And I think guys like Ross Chastain and Bubba Wallace would have liked to see it as well, especially if it was someone, a previous winner. But
Yeah.
the implications for the playoffs this week, it's going to be, I don't think it's a lot of points racing. I mean, there's just guys that need to win, in my opinion, unless there's an issue with one of those guys on the cut line. You're going to have to win if you're on the outside right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a decent-sized gap that they're going to have to bridge. Of course, there'll be a little bit at stake for guys at the top of the field, a race that would have been a lot more hotly contested if Denny Hamlin hadn't been the recipient of a 75-point penalty that changes his dynamic, not just for the regular season championship, but his prospects for making a deep playoff run. Gone is the mulligan that he otherwise would have had potentially at his disposal if he had a little bit more of that. So we give credit where credit is due. You mentioned some of the drivers that were on the unfortunate receiving end of things. And to your point, it's a good thing that it appears that Daytona will be back as the regular season finale. NASCAR did unveil their 2025 schedule, much to our chagrin. No Homestead in the playoffs like we expected. We'll get Vegas in the penultimate stage, which now takes on added importance and a lot of quirks and hopefully opportunities for us, but no reason to look that far down the road with so much on the runway in front of us going forward. So quick stage one, we'll wave the green-white checkered flag and move on to stage two. Want to encourage all of you, the guys and girls out there tuning into the Stay Green podcast. You can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. And for all things Bet the Board for NASCAR and beyond, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And when we look at Darlington, it's the second time that we're here on the schedule. Thankfully, high tire wear. We keep two of these races. This Southern 500, though, it's a little bit more war of attrition than when we come here in the spring where it's 100 miles less. When we talk about Darlington, it's a 1.36 mile track, asphalt, high tire wear. There's no strategy. There's no fuel. It's every time that yellow flag comes out, you're getting 4 Dr. Feelgoods, and you're hoping that your car is ready to roll. At the Lady in Black, the track too tough to tame. I know I ask you this every year that we come to the Darlington, but at the same time, what are some of the track comps do you use? Do you look at the intermediates? Do you look at the mile and a halves? Or does Darlington kind of become an entity unto itself, knowing that we won't go to Homestead until we get into the playoffs?
I think I would say Miami Homestead, but we haven't been there this year. Maybe a little bit of Kansas because of the tire wear, but ultimately Darlington is its own animal. And we also, remember, we have a spring race here. So I think you're going to take a lot of information that you could see in that first race and help apply that to this race here in the final race of the regular season. So the more that I do this, the track comps just become smaller and smaller, and you can kind of pick out the nuances of each track. I think that it really is important to highlight that this is the best first pit stall in all of NASCAR. And we saw Tyler Reddick take advantage of it when we came here in the spring, and whoever puts it on the pole will certainly have an advantage. And it's a massive one where I don't think he lost a race off pit road, and it didn't matter where he came on pit road. So I think that's the one thing that's very different than a lot of other tracks is I would put a little asterisk next to this first pit stall. And you saw earlier this year when Brad Keselowski had a chance to win this pole and he didn't, he was bummed because he knew that every time he came down pit road, he was going to be dealing with that 45 team, most likely coming off first.
And you get a handful more pit stops, too, in this race. So it
Absolutely.
gives you
That's
that
a great
even
point.
bigger opportunity to pick up some of those all-important positions should you have good stops, whether they come under caution conditions or green flag. The good thing, all signs point to it being relatively clear, at least on Saturday. So hopefully qualifying doesn't get rained out. Low of 72, upwards of 92. So hot and slick. And the one thing that we will see on race day on Sunday starts late in the afternoon, goes into the evening. So there will be some changing track conditions to contend with there. When we begin to look at the various drivers, and it's, of course, a list of usual suspects as it pertains to a true driver's track. Tier 1, we're talking Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, and Tyler Reddick. Throw a blanket over that trio of drivers, anywhere from 4.5 on the low end, upwards of 6 if you shop around. We've seen prices on a couple other drivers start to come down a little bit as well. So when we look at those trio, Chris, anything that you find that really creates something, a line of demarcation, anything to delineate them from one another as we're talking about drivers in the single digits?
I think if you're looking at those three specifically, this is arguably Kyle Larson's best track. I would probably throw Homestead a tick above this, but he's been fast, whether it's during the day, at night here at Darlington. He's won here in this car. I imagine he'll take the lead at some point. I think that, Larson will be out there leading laps. Over the long run, he's been great. I think you have to look at Denny Hamlin, he really struggled here for what he's used to earlier this year. And, we didn't see him out there leading laps. It was kind of like a 6th or 7th place car at best all day long. I mean, at one point, Todd Gilliland was passing him after a 25 lap run. I thought that was odd. I remember tweeting specifically, well, this is different. Denny Hamlin just lost his. Denny Hamlin's spotter came on to his radio and just said, clear behind the 38, which means he's getting passed and he can go ahead and take his spot behind Todd Gilliland. So I know that he called his shot, or I think he called his shot on actions detrimental. He's called his
shots a number of times, and I didn't realize either that when you go back and look at Denny's season in a nutshell, he hasn't won a race since April. That surprised me as much as anything else, which just goes to show how difficult it actually is to win races in the Cup Series.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, is Hamlin going to be good? Yeah, I don't like 5-1. I think, he wasn't fast enough, in my opinion, at any point in the race to kind of warrant that price. It's not that Denny Hamlin can't win. I just don't like that price. Tyler Reddick, there's an argument that he should be the favorite.
I'm right there with you. The fact he's a plus 130 underdog in head-to-head matches with Denny Hamlin. I know we don't like to fade the 11 and fade the 5 because you ain't going to get rich doing it, but there's a distinct case to be made that, you know what, the 45 should probably be a pick 'em or maybe minus 105 if we're talking about a 20-cent straddle there.
Yeah, not only that he could go out there and lead a lot of laps and win this race, he also has the best average starting spot of the 5 races since we've been here. His average start is 5.4. That best Chris Bell, Joey Logano, Kyle Larson, William Byron, all of those guys have an average starting position higher than that. So if you're looking at, kind of market entry, gosh, he could do it right now and probably be on the better side of those matchups. Whether you like the way that they looked in practice or not, you're probably getting the better side of that number. Now, whether it plays out in a longer race, I definitely trust the 11 more than I trust the 45 when it just comes down to figuring out throughout the night and adjusting to track conditions. But Reddick ran a real strong race, and he has been the model of consistency. Very impressive. The win at Michigan and just the way that whole team is running is very impressive. So, don't shy away from Reddick at this 6-1 number. If he looks good, he's going to be leading a lot of laps, and that could open up some other opportunities for potential live bets if you have an opportunity to do so.
The last driver in Tier 1, and we've seen his number shorten a little bit from where prices opened in that 10-1 range now, kind of into the single digits, would be the winner of the spring race in the 6 car, Brad Keselowski. When you look at Brad and what he's been able to do, high tire wear and true driver's tracks is really where he's out there at his absolute best. And he's finished 7th or better in the last 3 next-gen races here, started 10th or better in the 2 races here last year. Interestingly enough, this is a guy who doesn't qualify well, yet at Darlington, he understands how important it is not to have to work your way through the field. And again, 100 driver rating, pretty much synonymous with what we've expected from Brad.
Yeah, I think if you go back and watch this Darlington race from the spring, you'll notice that there was a very big discrepancy long run versus short run. I think that Brad, whether that was just car setup or that was Brad taking care of his tires, Reddick did a great job of going out there and getting a lead, and he would get out to like 3 or 4 second leads. And once he started to hit lap traffic, handling started to come in, and that 45 car was not handling as well in the long run as the 6 car. So Brad was able to get underneath and make passes more efficiently, therefore closing down a lead, and actually went through. I think he went and ran him down in one stage 2. So, or no, he didn't. He did not win stage 2. I don't think he won stage 2, but either way, he ran him down, and it was rather impressive in the manner in which he did it. And I remember listening to TJ Majors, his spotter, quite consistently, he would come on the radio and say, hey, let him go. He's going to get out to a 3 or 4 second lead, but once he starts hitting lap traffic, we're going to go ahead and go after him. So, and he would run him down every single time. And that's just the way that this track is. It's why they call it a driver's track. You can save your stuff in the short run to be good on the long run. 8-1 on Brad. Ooh, we're getting maybe a little short.
He was 16-1 when we bet him when we came to Darlington earlier. So the market has clearly responded and reacted to him having won this race here in the spring.
We've also played him at 8-1 in the past. I thought that was a great opening number when we've seen, I think it was, go back to 2011 or 2012. I thought that this was a great number on Brad Keselowski when Carl Edwards beat him off of pit road and was able to win the race after Brad led a majority of it. But RFK has speed on these intermediates. And this was the one track this year where not only did they have good speed in the long run, they qualified well. And Brad, just missing out on the pole, was there all day long. What we've seen out of RFK and Brad in the 17 is they haven't qualified well enough to race up to the front. They've always had to pick off some strategy, and they've always been at a slight disadvantage. Even though they did get some track position, they were at a little bit of a tire disadvantage, or they're a little bit of a fuel disadvantage. This is the one place where you're not going to be able to do that. You can't stay out. You can't, short pit. That all you can do is maybe pit 5 or 6 laps after guys pit. I think I love that strategy. I like it when guys do that. We saw this out of the 23 car earlier this year at this track, and we also saw it out of the 12, and it worked really, really well for them. But, if this Keselowski car doesn't qualify well, or they just unload a tick off, it could be a little bit longer weekend, and we could see a number higher than this 8-1 price.
When we start to make the move from tier 1 into tier 2, I think books have really struggled to price these next two drivers, and William Byron and Martin Truex Jr. Quite frankly, William Byron hasn't been great since winning races early in the year. You begin to wonder the age-old question, are they tinkering? Are they experimenting? Suddenly we get into the playoffs, and the 24 is a contender first and foremost. We're not going to get a huge accurate indication of that, knowing that Atlanta is the first playoff race, but something to keep in your back of your mind. When it comes to Darlington, William Byron, 3 straight finishes of 8th or better here, led just 7 total laps in 2023. But at the same time, consistently finds his way to be very much in the mix. Meanwhile, Martin Truex Jr., there's so many questions that we have about the 19 car and everything that's going on. It leaves you scratching your head going, somewhere along the way, the speed that's shown up for the 19, he is going to find a way to get back into things, but he just hasn't been able to do so in quite some time.
Yeah, the 19s, if you were to tell me this price, earlier in the year, I thought I would have loved it. But it's almost like, well, when is the 19 going to make their mistake? And they've kind of been snake bit the entire year. They've had fast cars, and this might be Truex's best track if I had to pick one. I think he's going to be good. I actually think that this is maybe the best outright price on the board at Truex at 10-1. If he goes out there and qualifies on the pole, which he has done in this car in the past, or even starts in the top 4, I think you're going to see that price shorten up to the 6-7-1 range. So
Truex is 10-1 to win the race, and he's 10-1 to finish the race inside the top 20. So it's a question of which market you want to try and bet into.
I don't like him in top 5 markets or in matchups. I'd like him to win the race. So, risk a little bit to win a lot. But when it comes to William Byron, kind of the opposite. This guy's just been very consistent. All 5 of these races, he's finished in the top 15. With this car at this track. He's got 4 top 10s, and gosh, he just doesn't really make mistakes at a track where a mistake can you brush the wall, or you hit the wall too hard and you end up blowing a tire. You're going to go laps down, and they've just been really consistent. So average finish of 6.4 leads the series. And I anticipate them to just be solid all day, but have not seen race-winning speed out of the 24 in a while. So maybe look for the 24 in matchups and then kind of wait on this 10-1 outright price.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the metrics there for the 24, and I misspoke earlier. He's led a total of 9 laps in his last 3 trips here, but that hasn't stopped the 24 from being first in average finish, first in total speed ranking, first in driver rating, first in average running position. So he has been in the thorn of the sides of matchup bettors that are looking to bet against him. But to your point, the outright stuff hasn't quite been there. Christopher Bell, meanwhile, when we talk about the 20 car, ranked second in playoff points, scored with 25. So he's done his fair share of damage there. A series best 10 stage wins so far this season. When we look at his Darlington finishes, 3 straight finishes, though, outside the top 10, a driver rating of 93 or worse in all 3 of those races. And the next gen stats, pretty middling for a driver that has such a short price here. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that, look, this may not be Christopher Bell's best track, but quite frankly, seeing him have the same price tag attached to him as drivers that have shown consistent speed, like Martin Truex Jr., like William Byron, feels to be a little bit of a leap of faith.
Well, this is a tale of 2 cars, in my opinion. You have the short track package, and I think that they're way ahead of the rest of the field when it comes to that particular package. But intermediates this year, we really haven't seen the same stuff. We obviously saw it at Gateway, but he qualified up front and just kind of didn't make any mistakes. Bell's been good here, but not great here. He hasn't had a car that's really stood out to me as the best car. He does qualify rather well here with an average start of 6.8, but he's only led 8.6 laps on average in this race, and that's just not going to get it done. I think that William Byron's probably the only guy that's led that kind of number of, well, he's only led 9 laps altogether, and he's pulled out a win. At least Bell's winning or leading, 9 laps a race. But with an average finish of 12.2 and only 2 top 10s in 5 races, there's some inconsistency there with that 20 team. Not to mention, when they in the lead, how many times have they blown a race? I'm pretty sure they blew the first Richmond race with a speeding on pit road. They just blew the second Richmond race with a speeding on pit road late. So those things you just have to clean up. I don't care how fast your car is. If you're at Phoenix and there's a 50-lap run to the finish, you can't speed. And Chris Bell has shown that he doesn't have the ability to not speed late in a race, even with a 3 or 4 second lead.
Last driver that I want to get your take on is that I would call a tier 2 guy this week would be Ryan Blaney. And when we look at the 12 cars, produced back-to-back 9th place finishes before coming home 36th in the spring at Darlington. He's never registered a driver rating of 100 here, even before the next gen era. And when you're talking about some of the key metrics, I mean, Ryan Blaney's not really registering. As far as his season numbers, I mean, this is a guy that's, right around 9th in total speed at intermediate tracks. But again, not one of his best tracks by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I mean, his average running position is 14.3. That is extremely high for that 12 car. He's a guy that has a decent qualifying, qualifies on average inside the top 10, but his average finish of 16.8 just doesn't get it done, along with that average running position of 14.3 means he's typically fading when he gets to this track. We have seen him get a little bit better in the past. We saw at Homestead last year, but we've seen other high tire wear tracks where he just hasn't quite had the same speed as he showed last year at that race. I think he's a guy you're probably looking to fade in matchups if someone of similar talent maybe catches a setup and looks strong in practice or looks good in the long run, or maybe qualifies outside the top 20 with Blaney there in around top 10, I would assume. Maybe look to fade Ryan Blaney, but we'll see what happens when they unload. Ultimately, 16-1 is probably a pretty fair price, but I do think long run, you're going to make money fading Blaney here at Darlington.
A slew of drivers that fall into tier 3 that are priced right around 20-1 or thereabouts. And it includes the likes of a Ross Chastain, who now has to win and get in. Chase Elliott, who didn't exactly perform all that well, joked about it when he got knocked out at Daytona, that they were due for a little bit of misfortune. It ended up ending a career-long streak of 37 consecutive races where the 9 car was running at the finish. Chris Buescher, does he race a little bit more cautiously, knowing he has a points cushion? He's now actually winless in his last 35 Cup starts. How quickly time flies when we're talking about some of this stuff. Ty Gibbs, back-to-back top 5s overall, 3 top 5s over his last 6 races. Finished second here in the spring, and he's a guy at 1.5-mile tracks that's done a pretty good job of keeping himself relevant, more so than some of the short tracks. And then there's Bubba Wallace, who needs to win and get in. He's been the model of consistency in terms of top 10s, but not necessarily race-winning machinery. Joey Logano, if you can figure out the 22, you're going to have a much better handicap than the market does most week. And, of course, I mean, we can get to your beloved Kyle Busch, but I'm not sure Kyle at 40-1 is going to make your dance card.
I think it's important. We're now getting to those drivers where last week kind of dictated what these drivers are going to need to do in order to make the playoffs. I think Ross Chastain needs to win. He's on the outside looking in. And I think that the other drivers that he's up against run consistently enough here, like Chris Buescher, who's 21 points to the good, has a 27-point lead on Ross Chastain. I think you got to go out there and win the race if you're Ross Chastain. I anticipate RFK to unload reasonably well. Ross, we've seen him struggle a little bit in qualifying, so his back's going to be up against the wall, and it's not like you can make an aggressive strategy call. You can try, but it's just too tired.
There's no Hail Melon at Darlington.
Yeah, there's no Hail Melon.
The Lady in Black.
So here's what I would say. That guy's going to be driving desperately, especially towards the end of the race. And even if his car looks good, he's a top 3 or top 4 car, and he's typically a guy that you'd like to have in matchups. Just be careful because he's going to be rim riding as much as he can in order to make up speed because he has to win the race. So he's a guy that if he looks strong, maybe take him to win, but avoid these top 5, top 10 prices because it does the team no good for him to roll in 8th. So if there's someone that's willing to be stubborn and push that car past the limit, I would say that would fit Ross Chastain to a T. And just be careful there. When it comes to Chase Elliott, definitely someone we faded in the spring. He's a poor qualifier here with an average starting spot at 24th. I mean, that is
not good, Bob.
terrible.
Not good at all.
And it's not like he showed any speed in the long run. I know that I think, Larson cut him a break, not putting him a lap down at the end of stage 1 last in the spring. So not a track for Chase Elliott. However, he's a guy that if he looks strong in practice and maybe you get a 14 or 15 to 1 on him, yeah, absolutely. I trust Chase Elliott if he has a good car. But I think you have to wait with the way that they've qualified and unloaded recently. So I'd wait on Chase Elliott. Chris Buescher, back into the guy that, hey, he's 21 points to the good. He's got a desperate Bubba Wallace, a desperate Ross Chastain, trying to go out there and win the race. He can control his destiny. He can go out there, pick up stage points in the first 2 stages, run a solid race, run 5th all day. I guarantee you that, the race ends differently if you were to just take the spring race when he was running, running 3rd. I don't think he would have been racing that hard like they did in the spring because there just wasn't that much on the line. I think if you do see someone racing that aggressively around Chris Buescher, like we saw with Tyler Reddick and Brad Keselowski earlier in the spring, I think you'll see him back off, take his 3rd place finish, get their asses in the playoff, and then start from there. So I like Buescher more in these matchup type situations, maybe a top 5 or a top 10 price. That's where I think you can make some money off of Chris Buescher. I do anticipate him to be good. I don't anticipate him to particularly qualify well. I think he will be the 2nd best qualifying Roush car. And it's just a matter of whether they unload quickly enough to get into the top 10 for qualifying. Haven't seen it, but I do trust him in the long run in some other markets, just not the outright market. Ty Gibbs was really impressive here in the spring. Brad Keselowski did not just coast to a win after the 17 and the 45 got into it. He was up to like a 2.5 second lead and only won by like 0.7 of a second. So Ty Gibbs had a really strong run earlier in the year. Where things have been different is that was back when the 54 was fast week in and week out. We kind of hit this summer lull. We hadn't seen much out of him until Michigan, which I thought he was going to struggle a little bit. Actually, once he got some track position, he was running some good lap times and able to make passes. So does that speed transfer over to Darlington? If it does, maybe this Ty Gibbs guy at a 20 to 1 price could be interesting. Now, I don't think he's ready to win quite yet. We haven't seen him lead enough laps. We haven't seen him go up there and take the lead from someone. Anytime he's gotten to the lead, it's because of a mistake. It's because of some sort of strategy on pit road. I want to see him go take the lead from someone. And until he does that, I'm still going to be on the sidelines for outright prices. Bubba, he just got to win. You just got to win. I think that they've had a bad break with Harrison Burton winning. I think that Bubba has done everything he needs to do to get into the playoffs. He would be on the inside had Harrison not won, but hey, that's the deal. You got to go out there and perform. And I don't think he can win this week. Again, he's another guy I would put with Ross Chastain. Maybe take him to win the race, but be very careful if you're going to look to play him in top 5, top 10s, or even a matchup, because you have to push. And although I don't think he'll do something quite as dumb as Ross Chastain, he just has to win. So that's kind of where I'm at on Bubba. Did we talk about Logano?
No, Logano was one of the last guys that we had there to break down the 22.
I'm kind of shocked that he's the same price as Bubba. I mean, Joey Logano's won here in this car, albeit he Austin Dilloned William Byron, if you know, you know, and was able to win that way.
Details.
Yeah. But ultimately, he has typically a good starting spot, an average start of 7.4, average running position of inside the top 10. He leads on average 35 laps every time we come here. So this is a guy that we haven't just seen be a rocket in practice, but oh, look, there he is running fourth with 30 to go. And it's like, where's he been all day? And on a restart, anything can happen.
At the back. No reason to draw attention to yourself early on for the Pennzoil Mustang or whatever the hell he's driving this weekend.
Yeah. I think so. I don't mind this price of Joey Logano. Maybe unfortunately, I don't think the top 10 is quite as lucrative as this outright price, but I don't think anyone would be shocked if Joey Logano went out there and won at Darlington. He's won here before, and it is one of these tracks where you just find speed late in a run. If you can do that, along with Paul Wolfe making the adjustments from day to night, I would say that this is a decent outright price, although we'll see what happens when they unload.
Do you want to make a case for Kyle Busch being live at 40-1 to try and win and get himself in, given that RCR has at least shown speed since we returned from the Olympic break?
Yeah, I think so. There's multiple strategies when you're running at a place like Darlington and Richmond, where you, let's just say you're breaking up the stage. A lot of times guys will short pit to try to undercut and then make it hard for the leader or the previous leader to pass you. I like the other way. I like staying out those 7 or 8 more laps. Yeah. Are you losing a lot of time? Yeah. You're losing about 2 seconds a lap. Don't go a lap down and then have 8 lap fresher tires for the remainder of the run. And I think that you're going to have to see, someone like Kyle Busch do that in order to win. He did qualify a little bit better, or he has qualified a little better, and he looks like he has just more speed at Michigan, at Richmond. I just don't know that he can get out there and win. But if you think RCR is going to be strong, I would say I like the Austin Dillon top 10 number at like a 7-1. If you think RCR is going to be fast, top 10 does nothing for Kyle Busch and he's minus 140. So that to me just doesn't quite make sense. If you're going to take Kyle in anything, just take him to win. I don't think he can, but if you do think RCR is going to be fast, maybe take a look at that Austin Dillon number to finish top 10.
It's such an interesting story because if RCR had a little bit more runway, I'm not saying Kyle Busch should be able to bridge that gap being down 100 points of the cut line or wherever he is, but this is the kind of speed you would have liked to see much earlier in the season for that 8 to build some momentum. And look, even if Kyle Busch finds himself outside the top 16, we know that the one piece of history that he'd like to see continue is 19 straight seasons of driving into victory lane. So it still gives the RCR team something to aspire to in that particular regard. So Kyle is able to try and get that thing across the finish line. So just something to think about.
I actually have a funny thing. I thought I was on Twitter. I was just kind of looking at social media, and I saw a video of Kyle Busch driving, seeing a bunch of Kyle Busch stickers on the back of a car entering Daytona. So he pulled up kind of beside him, sped up beside him and passed him and waved, and the guy honked. And it was a great, fan experience for someone to be a Kyle Busch fan, then have him wave to you. Well, for some reason, I was just thinking I can say things like this on Twitter, like, oh, that's the first pass that the 8's made all year is what I said. But I said it on Instagram, not on Twitter. And all of a sudden, my phone is blowing up with all these comments on my Kyle Busch's post. And I forgot.
Oh, you put it on Kyle Busch's post.
I put it on Kyle Busch's post.
Good luck with that. But you know what? You may get a lot more interaction that you're looking for.
Oh my gosh, way more interaction than on Twitter. I mean, at least I have people on Twitter that come to my defense. Well, Kyle Busch actually hasn't made a pass. These people are Kyle Busch fans. One guy said, "More passes than you've made this year, you virgin." I was like, what? What do you
I mean? When you have a chance to question, someone's manhood in that regard, social media never lets you down in terms of questioning dick size or how many times you've been
one guy's
with a co-ed.
That says a lot coming from a guy that drinks Trulies. I'm like, do I have a Trulies on my profile? I don't know what's on my Instagram.
Did you have Trulies in your profile, Worm?
I don't think I have Trulies on my profile, but I like Trulies. Yeah, absolutely. I like Trulies. So
and there's no shame in liking there's no shame liking a Truly every now and again.
Just big difference between Twitter and Instagram. I had a bunch of Kyle Busch fans that just absolutely hated me, but I thought it was funny.
Let it be known that Worm will now be going on and commenting on all of drivers' Instagram pages if they do things in a positive or negative manner, because he enjoys the dopamine rush that he gets from being antagonized by the diehard NASCAR community. All right, we're waving the green, white checkered flag on stage 2. We broke down the drivers to the best of our abilities, the buys, the sells, the fades, the holds, you name it, all there at your disposal. So stage 3, it'll be short and sweet, but I think it's always important to try and look at setting the playoff picture, and you did a good job teasing that at the top of the show. As we know, Martin Truex plus 58, going to be very difficult for him to be on the outside looking in, but it was only a couple of years ago at Kansas, or last year at Kansas, where Truex exited the race on lap 4, and that would create a real sweatbox for him. When you look at Ross Chastain and Bubba Wallace, would have been a lot more fascinating to follow that storyline if Harrison Burton hadn't driven into victory lane last week. But now this is the hand we've been dealt. Do you feel there's an opportunity from a handicapping standpoint where we're able to take some of the information that's out there, use it to our advantage, and be able to create some plus EV situations?
Yeah, I do think that there's a couple guys that you just can't take a chance on them when, this is a cutoff race for the playoffs. I think you have to look at guys like Ty Gibbs. I like him in matchups. I don't necessarily like him to win the race. I think he just wants to run inside the top 10. I know he's young, but he's also going to have, his grandpa in his ear and his crew chief in his ear saying, hey, this is good. You're going to get us into the playoffs. So I also like the same thing with Chris Buescher. I think that they're just going to run solid races, just try to get into the playoffs. They control their own destiny. As long as something ridiculous doesn't happen, they can punch that ticket. Guys like Bubba Wallace and Ross Chastain, I bet they were wishing that this was a track like Indy or Michigan, because then there's at least a little bit of strategy that you can play. Fuel can become an issue. We're not going to see any fuel as an issue. The only time fuel becomes, in play or becomes just a strategy is when the tires don't matter. This week, tires matter. So
no fuel races here, my friend.
Yeah, you're not going to take fuel only on a green flag pit stop and expect to do anything here. So I do think Kyle Busch has a chance at potentially winning this thing. If he were to somehow get out front late, I just don't know how he gets there. But that's certainly a must-win situation.
Speed, Worm. The answer is speed. That's typically how you get to the front.
Todd Gilliland was very strong here in the spring, kind of running right around 10th all day. This is not me, by the way, people on social media. This is not me predicting Todd Gilliland. I am just pointing out that he ran well.
They may be running a bet Todd to 38 for a top 10 at a long shot price tag.
But then there's also another guy that finished third here in the spring that I think actually does present an interesting opportunity, and that's Josh Berry.
Do we want to go? Do we want to go drum roll here and roll from stage 3? Wave the
we can
flag.
Roll from stage 3. Yeah, you want to improvise a little bit?
Yeah, we'll call it the best bet portion of the program because I think I have an indication of where you're going.
Yeah, well, I do like this 4-car and Josh Berry. Yes, he is in a must-win situation, but I just think that running solidly, he's still new into the series. He's 210 points out. I just think that this car over the long run was one of the best cars here in the spring. He started 33rd. He drove all the way up to 3rd, and that was without strategy, right? So anytime that you drive through the field at Darlington, it's because you just passed that many cars. And I like Josh Berry, top 10. He's right around that 2-to-1 price. I think 2 plus 210 at FanDuel, DraftKings right around 2-to-1. There are some local shops that might have a little bit better number than that, but Josh Berry to finish inside the top 10, I love that number. I think he'll qualify a little bit better. If he does qualify a little better, I think it will be important to protect that top 10 with a win price, because all of a sudden our driver that would be happy finishing the top 10 thinks he's going to go out there and win the race. And you're going to want to make sure that you get paid properly if Berry does have a race-winning car, which he absolutely could. I just can't see him doing something like Ross Chastain would do, where he feels maybe entitled to be in the playoffs. I think it'll just be a great learning experience for this 4 team. And you're getting paid properly at that 2-to-1 price to finish in the top 10.
It's an interesting race and one that really going to benefit drivers that can go out there, show some of the raw speed. But look, in a season that's been somewhat unpredictable of late, we've seen Austin Cindric go out there and flat out win a race. Took a little bit of a lucky bounce here or there to be an improbable winner. Harrison Burton leads 1 lap, but drives himself into victory lane at Daytona. We won't see some of that, but you mentioned Austin Dillon at Richmond, and that's the kind of ride that somebody that outside the playoff picture is going to need to get himself into the mix. So should be a fun afternoon and evening. And I know it's one of your favorite tracks from a betting standpoint and watchability. So it's always something to look forward to on Labor Day weekend when this thing has the dropping of the green flag around 6:30 Eastern time. Pre-race poll, holiday weekend. What do you have in store for people that want your final thoughts heading into the race? Wasn't sure exactly what you had on the docket.
Yeah, it'll be 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. And yeah, I'll be back doing the pre-race poll. So bring an adult beverage or not, but bring your questions and let's try to figure out if there's some actionable items come race time. So looking forward to this weekend. It's been kind of a long go of, just kind of difficult tracks. You look at Daytona, we don't really bet. Michigan wasn't spectacular. Richmond was just crazy. Don't even know what to say about it. Indianapolis and Pocono, two of the, I guess, very low passing type races. So we're getting into Darlington's a good spot. I think Watkins Glen's a good spot. We're going to go back to Bristol. Then Kansas is just becoming one of the best tracks out here. So I think there's going to be some more opportunity here as we close out the season and see how things end in Phoenix.
Hey, before we put a bow on this episode, what was your experience like in Portland with last week's guest when you went out to the Indy race?
It was
there in the Pacific Northwest.
It was a lot of fun. So thanks to everybody from the Bit Nile team. They hosted us. It was kind of fun to get a chance to walk around and talk with Ed Carpenter and his team. Were very gracious hosts. Rob got to wave their green flag, which I thought was hilarious.
Which is incredible.
It's just funny seeing him up there just kind of grinning, like just cheesing, like, I can't believe I'm waving the green flag to start a race. And he was funny because like, hey, don't drop it. Like, obviously that's just A1 advice from everybody. And he was telling me he was going to put a little flicker on it, like, kind of the very fancy flicker.
It's aggressive. That's an aggressive type of move.
Yep. And well, what happened was he said it got windy and then he got nervous. So he just went straight arm waving the flag. And I kind of asked him what happened. And he just said the wind was completely unpredictable and he couldn't make that kind of mistake. So he adjusted on the fly and went with just a very lame start of the green flag. But it's kind of crazy because, Indy cars are much more quiet and obviously faster. Man, they waved the green flag. I couldn't even see the cars. And then he started waving it and he waved it for like 10 seconds before it seemed like they got here. So I don't know if he maybe pulled the trigger a little early.
Wow.
Or what happened there, but ultimately great experience. So thank you to everybody at the Bit Nile team, Todd Alt, John Stewart, and Ed Carpenter were definitely nice to us when it came to walking us around the garage.
You got to be careful when you drop that green flag. You can't have somebody jumping the gun from in the restart zone. Almost cost Brad a very good finish last week at Daytona. If there weren't 7,000 wrecks, the 6 car would have gotten shuffled back to the end of the lead line.
Yep, absolutely. It was a good time, though.
All right. Well, thanks as always, buddy. Looking forward to this weekend at Darlington. I know our listeners will have plenty of questions. Of course, you can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there. And for all things Bet the Board, including all of your football needs, all fall long, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And most importantly, before the Southern 500, one of NASCAR's crown jewels, sees the cars unload onto the track for practice, you'll already have a Josh Berry top 10 ticket in your portfolio. And come Sunday afternoon, evening, we'll see you at the window.